Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's watercolor tutorial, we're going to paint a beautiful translucent flower petal and learn how to create those delicate veins, soft color transitions, and realistic details that make a petal look alive. This project is simple, relaxing, and perfect for beginners who want to improve their watercolor skills while creating something elegant and beautiful. So grab your brushes, prepare your paints, and let's get started. As always, I'm starting with a 300 GSM 100% cotton watercolor paper. I really like using cotton paper because it absorbs water beautifully and stays flat much better while painting. Before we begin, I make sure to secure the paper firmly with masking tape. This keeps everything in place, prevents the paper from shifting under my hand, and makes the whole painting process much more comfortable and enjoyable. Now that everything is ready, let's start painting. For this painting, I'm sketching the subject freehand by carefully observing the reference image. I'll make sure to share the reference photo with you in my Telegram channel, and you'll find the channel link in the video description below. Try your best to make your sketch as close to the reference as possible. And if freehand drawing feels challenging, don't worry. You can always use one of the sketch transfer methods we talked about in the previous lesson. As I'm drawing, whenever I feel that a line isn't quite right, I gently correct it using a kneaded eraser. Once the sketch is finished, I lightly erase the drawing to soften the pencil lines. This helps prevent the graphite from muddying the watercolor later and leaves only a very faint guide on the paper. Now let's take a quick look at the colors we'll be using for this project. The main color is a very soft pink, which I create by heavily diluting a red watercolor with plenty of water. Next, I'll be using a violet color, along with a richer mixture of violet and red to create the darker areas and add depth to the petal. And honestly, that's almost all we need for this painting. We'll also use a tiny touch of light grassy green near the base of the petal to add a natural and realistic look. So with just these simple colors, we're ready to bring this beautiful petal to life. Now it's time for the first layer of color. For this stage, I'm using the wet-on-wet technique. First, I gently dampen the entire petal with a clean brush and a small amount of water. At this point, I'm not focusing on details or dark shadows. My goal is simply to establish the base color of the petal and create a soft, smooth foundation. Try to spread the color evenly and leave the areas that catch more light a little lighter. This will help us create transparency and realistic volume later on. I'm using the very diluted pink mixture we prepared earlier from red watercolor and water, applying a light and transparent wash over the petal. As you paint, keep looking at your reference image carefully. Notice where the colors are darker, where they're lighter, and which colors appear in different areas of the petal. Also, try not to load too much paint onto your brush. You'll notice that sometimes I accidentally apply too much color myself. When that happens, I simply place a piece of tissue paper onto the wet area to lift some of the excess paint, then gently soften and blend the color toward the lighter parts of the petal. keep adjusting and blending until you achieve a color intensity that matches your reference image. Remember, this first layer should stay very light and transparent, because in watercolor, it's always easier to make a painting darker later, but much harder to make it lighter. Once we're happy with this layer, we'll let the petal dry completely. If it needs a little more color, we'll add it at that stage. Otherwise, we'll move on to painting the delicate veins of the petal. Now it's time to paint the main vein running through the center of the petal. If your paper is still slightly damp, make sure to use a thicker, more concentrated mixture of paint. This helps the line stay defined and prevents the color from spreading too much across the paper. And if you're not completely comfortable controlling the paint on a wet surface yet, don't worry at all. Simply wait for the paper to dry completely before adding the vein details. Sometimes being patient actually gives you much better results. One of the most important lessons in hyper-realistic watercolor painting is patience. There's no need to rush. Beautiful details are built layer by layer, and every stage needs enough time to settle before moving to the next one. As you work, keep comparing your painting to the reference image. Notice how the veins become softer in some areas and more visible in others. These small observations make a huge difference in the final result. Trust the process. Take your time and enjoy every step of the painting. Little by little, you'll see the petals start to look more realistic and alive. Now let's start painting the delicate veins of the petal. This is one of my favorite parts because it's where the petal really starts to come to life. Using a fine brush and a slightly darker color mixture, I carefully paint the veins while constantly looking back at the reference image. Notice that not all veins have the same thickness or darkness. Some are more visible, while others are very soft and subtle. These small variations help create a much more natural and realistic look. Try not to draw every line with the same pressure or intensity. Let some veins fade gently into the petal, and allow others to stand out a little more. If a line appears too strong, you can soften it with a clean, damp brush before it dries completely. Take your time during this step. Hyper-realistic watercolor painting is all about patience and careful observation, and these tiny details are what make the final artwork feel delicate, realistic, and alive. And now we're at the final details, my favorite stage of the whole painting. At this point, I carefully compare my painting with the reference image and look for any small details that still need adjustment. Some areas may need a little more contrast, some shadows might need to be deepened, and a few veins may need to be refined to create a more realistic appearance. This is also the stage where I soften any harsh edges, balance the colors, and make sure everything feels harmonious and natural. Remember, it's often the tiny details that make the biggest difference in a hyper-realistic watercolor painting. Take your time, work slowly, and don't rush the final touches. Sometimes just a few subtle adjustments can completely transform the artwork. Once you're happy with the result, step back for a moment, admire your work, and enjoy the beautiful petal you've created. And here is the final result. After building up the colors layer by layer, adding the delicate veins, and refining all the small details, our watercolor petal is finally complete. What I love most about this painting is the soft transparency of the petal and the way the colors blend together to create a natural, realistic look. Remember, watercolor is all about patience, observation, and enjoying the process. Don't worry if your first attempt doesn't look exactly like the reference image. Every painting teaches you something new, and every project helps you improve. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me and found this tutorial helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next watercolor tutorial. Happy painting!